My name is Martin Goge, G-O-G-E. I was born in New York City on May 15th, 1928.
May 15th, 28.
And my family immediately moved to the suburbs where I was raised till I went in the Army.
What school did you go through?
I went to Holy Family Catholic School, and then I went to Iona Preparatory School, and I was going to night school at Iona College when I was drafted.
When were you drafted?
I was drafted in right after the war started. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I was working in New York City at SO Export, which is the aviation branch, and I had finished about half my college. And
what did you study in the college, and what
business administration, Iona College, and I graduated from the University of Detroit, which is a Jesuit college.
So you are Catholic?
Yes.
Did you know anything about Korea around you were in the college?
No.
You were college students and you didn't know about Korea?
I didn't know there was any place outside New York City. I was quite surprised to find that out.
How was New York City? I mean, you were born in 28, so it was...
No, I was born in 28.
28.
Well, let's put it this way. When my mother used to drive into New York City and shop at Stern's on 42nd Street, and we used to park at a meter and put pennies in.
So your family must have been very rich.
No. My father worked for Ingersoll Watch, which was during the Depression. He always had a job, but they went through bankruptcy quite often. But he had a job through the whole.
That's amazing that he had a job during the Great Depression.
I mean, it was. He held the place together, and but as a matter of fact, that watch company was very famous. During the Depression, they came out with a pocket watch that sold for $1, and which they called the Ingersoll Buck, the watch that made the dollar famous. So I wasn't hurting during the Depression.
Wow, you're lucky.
Yes, I am very lucky.
So then, what were you exactly doing when the Korean War broke out? June 25th,
I was a clerk in at SO Export, which was the aviation branch, overseas aviation gasoline. We sold all the carriers overseas gas and also gas at the local airports. Which was very nice because when I was drafted, if I put in an allotment from my mother, they made up half my salary.
Were you married at the time?
No.
You were single.
I was single, and very much so. Although I was going with a lady she was my boss's secretary. So, and when I went, I knew when I come back we're getting married.
Ah, what's her name?
Her name was Cecilia.
Cecilia. All right. What people say about Korean War at the time? Did people say actually anything about Korea, or
no? It was probably there was more more talk if there was a riot in the Bronx than the Korean War. I mean, there was talk about how Dean Acheson had declared Korea out of our sphere of influence, and that's why this had happened. Why the North Koreans felt they could take over South Korea.
Excellent point. I'm studying about. I'm writing a book about why Acheson withdrew the defensive perimeters from the Korean Peninsula.
Right.
What did people say about it? And did you know about the Acheson Declaration?
After the war started, I did, because if you follow the news, it was in the news, but the most stir about the Korean War was when I was in Korea, and that would be 51 and 52. The biggest stink that happened is when Truman fired MacArthur, and the girl who was not yet my wife joined what they called a Committee of 1 Million, who were making terrible fuss about Truman firing.
What is the club name? 1 million?
Committee of 1 Million. It was a New York committee. Oh. They had very well represented.
What is this Committee of 1 Million?
They just were a group of people who hated Harry Truman for having fired MacArthur.
So they formed this committee?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know.
Yeah, big thing.
Tell me more about it if you know.
I really don't. I just know what she wrote me in the letters, and that was 60-some-odd years ago. So, I really, I know she was very active in it. That's, and she was not normally the kind of person who got active in political things.
So, what happened to you after you were drafted?
Well, after I was drafted, I went to the induction center in Massachusetts, and most of my classmates who were drafted the day before went to Fort Monmouth for the Signal Corps, and there was no chance I was going to make the Signal Corps. That dot dash just left me completely out, and so myself and two of guys that I knew were sent to Camp Polk, Louisiana, to the 45th Infantry Division from Oklahoma had just been activated, and they were filled with young kids. Before they got activated, they made a big drive, go with the men you know, and all these young kids joined up. So we we didn't really take basic training. We just hung around Camp Polk for a couple of months, and then we got word we were going to go to Japan for advanced basic. And the officers looked around and they saw all these high school kids with the rank, and these people who had joined them, like myself. I was 22. And so after about 2 months in the Army, before we got on the boat, I was made recon sergeant, which is the buck sergeant in charge of headquarters platoon.
Headquarters platoon?
Headquarters platoon. And since that was made up of cooks who nobody bothered, and the company clerk who nobody bothered, and the motor pool who nobody bothered, I didn't really have very much to do.
Let me go back. When were you drafted?
I was drafted in about beginning of September 1950.
Oh. And then when did you arrive in Korea?
The 45th Division we went to Japan, and the 45th Division went and landed in Korea on January 1st, 1952. But I had gone over 30 days in advance with the advance party. And the reason I did that is when the 45th Division realized they were going into Korea, they sent all the Oklahomans home because of they had had terrible problems in World War II with whole towns, the males in whole towns being wiped out. And so I was made first sergeant, and the guys like myself were all platoon sergeants. It was a weapons company. We had a 75 millimeter recoilless rifle platoon, a heavy machine gun platoon with 30 caliber water-cooled machine guns, 4, and 75 millimeter recoilless rifle. And so I was made first sergeant, so I went over with the executive officer on the 1st of November, 1951.
No, okay.
So I was there in 52.
Right. Where did you station?
We were mostly in the Chorwan Valley and the Iron Triangle.
Choron Valley?
Chorwan.
In 1952?
Yeah.
There were severe battles there.
Yes, there were. As a matter of fact, do you know Tiger,
Yeah.
Although I was first sergeant, I got to go to several company commanders' meetings. And at one of them, I picked up a map of the Chorwan Valley, which was a regimental 270, our regiment's attack plan, and it was straightening our lines out, taking about 8 hills. It had where the tanks regiment put the tanks and the 81 millimeter mortar, and then they'd come to the company commanders meeting, and the rifle companies would fill in. Besides having the objectives, they also had the axis of attack, and so they would plan out the overall battle, and the company commanders of the rifle company would put in specific things. And I picked up a map of that action, and just a month ago I gave it to Tiger because I said, when I die, it's just going to get thrown out, and I gave him to, at least in Korea. But you're more than welcome to ask him for it. I think you'd find it quite interesting.
You gave what?
I gave a typographical map of a regimental attack, straightening out the lines.
Tell me about that regimental attack. The Chinese, right?
Yes.
And how was it done?
Well, you really can't tell. I mean, when you're in an operation like that, the only reason I was up with where the fighting was is that the 75 millimeter rifles and the machine gun platoons were lent out to rifle companies. And I felt my job as first sergeant was to keep them in touch with home. I'd string wires to them and go with them on evening raids and night raids, just so that they weren't taken advantage of. One of the things about being sent in as an outsider into a rifle company, you could be taken advantage of.
So you engaged in the battle directly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I must say, most of the fire I exchanged was at night on combat missions where each side would try and deny no man's land to the other side. And you just go out and try and make contact, and then one side or the other would bug out.
Can you tell me about kind of encounter with the enemies or dangerous moments in your service?
Confusion is the word you can use.
What do you mean by confusion?
Well, just a lot of shooting around you, and as they say, moments of terror and tremendous times of boredom. That was it.
So when did you leave Korea?
I left in the fall of 1952.
Fall of 1952. how you come recon sergeant so quickly?
Because I came into this group of high school kids. We had the officers were all World War II people from the 45th Division, which was a very famous World War II. But the soldiers were all just young children, young farm kids who joined just to make some money. And then they got activated, and they, when they were sent to Japan, they all went home. So here we had a company with just people like myself, people who had added to the company. Some were young draftees, and some people like myself were 22 years old and had half their college done. And that's really why I got to be.
There were not many college graduates there, right?
There were none. We had, in Japan, we had a lot of boys from the Indian schools. That's it.
What did you think about Korea at the time that you were in Korea? What was the scene? What was people like? And tell me.
I was very glad. I felt very satisfied at what I was doing. I had a sense of satisfaction, kind of like I was paying my dues, I guess. But except when it was not good, it was not bad at all. I mean, hard, but not bad. I mean, we lived in rather crude conditions, and we ate rather crude food, and but you were with your buddies, and you're alive and kicking. So.
So you were in Choron Valley until you left Korea?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we went into reserve, and none of the platoon sergeants or myself had taken any R&R. So when we were back in the reserve, we got a new commanding officer who we did not like at all. So all of the top sergeants asked for R&R leave to Japan. And when we got down to the airport, they called our names and told us to come back. And we went back and picked up our duffel bags and were shipped to Sasebo in Japan and went home. So I did get home a little early.
After you came back, did you talk about your service to your family?
Absolutely not at all.
Why not?
You can probably... I traveled a lot. I was a salesman. And I used to go to a lot of bars. And I used to hear a lot of stories, as I'm sure you hear a lot of stories. And I just got so fed up with them that I just kept quiet.
Why? Why you were so sick?
I guess that's the way I am.
You didn't want to disclose some of the stories that you had during the war?
But the kids asked me if I could get a film of this, because the one part of my life that they don't know about is this part.
It's strange because the veterans from the World War II, they talked about their war, right?
Some did, some didn't. We've got guys out here who love to go and talk about it. They go to schools and stuff like that. I've never, and there are a lot of people who are in that. And I noticed more guys who had boots on the ground in Korea proper are that way than the Navy guys or the Air Force guys.
Then why do you talk now about your service?
Because our commander asked me to come here. He knew I had avoided this, and he's been such a perfect guy for our chapter that I can't refuse anything the guy asks.
What's his name? Bob?
Bob
Ader.
Ader, right.
Hmm. Why people say the Korean War was forgotten? It's why people say it's a forgotten war.
Well,
people like you don't talk about it, so
Yeah.
that people don't know about it.
that's true. And, you know, I went through a whole part of growing up after I got home, and I never joined the Legion. I never joined anything until I got much older, and then I did it because I drank. and then it branched out into this Korean group, and I enjoy this Korean group more than any group I've.
Korea was very outdated at the time, right?
I think that's a good word, outdated. People were absolutely tired of World War II. I mean, you can't believe how tired the American people were of World War II. I mean, they had been rationed and didn't have lots of things, and were it was an upsetting time for a lot of people. The men were all drafted, the women were all working.
What is the legacy of the Korean War and Korean War veterans?
The answer for the Korean War?
The legacy. Why was
Oh,
it?
I'll tell you, the whole thing boils down. Have you seen that map? I'm sure you have seen the map of North and South Korea at night lit up. To me, that says everything. When people tell me that Korea is the 10th largest economy, I feel pretty good about that. Now, I've never gone back on the revisit Korea. And the reason I haven't, I have no desire to go back and see big buildings. If it was like it was when I was there, I would give anything to go back. But to go back to the opulence that's there now is just no interest. And did you notice how few guys at lunch on Sunday raised their hands?
Right, yeah.
There were 6 guys who raised their hands, they went back. And all those guys were probably more like me, who didn't say much.
There were more Korean War veterans who had an interview with me rather than those who went to Korea through a revisit program.
Yeah, and the guys who go out and talk at schools and stuff like that.
Hello America program.
Yeah, their Air Force and Navy, and although the guy who was just ahead of me, he was there, and he's very quiet.
Jack.
He's a lot like he was old like I was when he was drafted. He was drafted into a National Guard company, and we're a lot alike.
So, do you agree that Atchison should haven't done that?
Pardon?
Atchison, Dean Atchison. Do you think that? Do you agree that Dean Atchison should have not spoken?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I more than most, I believe that was the sole cause of this Korean War. I mean, when you announce, I mean, you had to be alive at the time to know how carefully people watched the nuanced words. I mean, that was extremely nuanced, and yet to them it was like getting hit over the head with a hammer. I mean.
Are you willing to go visit Korea?
Yeah, as I say, I don't want to go back and see a bunch of big buildings. If I could see where I was and bunkers and stuff, I would go back in a second, but not to see some big city or to visit some plant.
Do you have any message to young generations about your experience in the war?
Yeah, my biggest message would be how great the Korean people are. I mean, you don't know what it's like to have been an American and go to France now, and right after the war, before the war was over, the French hated us, and the Koreans have just been, I mean, you can't believe how wonderful the Korean people, not only the generation that we fought for, but the children and the grandchildren of it's just really amazing. Lunch Sunday was a perfect example.
So how did your military experience impact and affect your life?
The biggest impact at all, I was a C student in night school when I left, and I was an A student when I came back.
What did you do?
I got married. Before I graduated, I had 3 children, and good business promotion. And had I not been a Korean veteran with first sergeant stuff like that, I don't think as many opportunities in business would have been open to me.
Do you have grandchildren in the age of college students?
No, I have grandchildren in their 50s. Oh, no, children in their 50s, grandchildren all out of college, and
how old are they?
A great-grandson. My kids are 23 to 28.
Grandchildren?
Yeah.
Ah, you know what? I created Korean War Veterans Youth Corps. It's like a peace corps by the Kennedy.
Yeah.
And I did it last year because I want them to be able to continue on your legacy of the Korean War veterans. And if you have grandchildren in their 20s, I already reserved the hotel room for the convention here in Washington, D.C. from July 25th to 28th. If they're interested in, it's all free except the transportation.
Yeah, I asked, I have one grandson who I thought might take the return to Korea as a grandson, but he's
not interested.
As a matter of fact, instead he went to China, and I mean he's got an interest in a lot of things, but not interested. Very. My generation of grandchildren is not really interested in war.
Common characteristics.
Yeah, they don't think much of our involvement in the Mideast and all that.
Any other message that you want to add?
Absolutely not, except thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for coming. Thank you
it's
for
my
coming,
pleasure.
and I want to thank you for your fight for the Korea.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.